The morning Nora found out her mother-in-law had tried to kill her husband, she was standing in the hospital hallway in yesterday's clothes, holding a juice box she'd packed for Moon's lunch, and the head of neurology was looking at her like he was deciding how much of the truth she could survive. She gave him 3 seconds. "Say it," she said. He said it. The car accident that had put Woo Bin in a coma for 11 days had not been an accident. The brake fluid in his car had been drained, deliberately, professionally, and the security footage from the private garage of the Kwan family compound the night before the crash, footage that someone had tried very hard to delete but had not tried hard enough, showed a man no one could immediately identify, wearing a badge that made Nora's stomach drop straight through the floor. She didn't recognize the man. She recognized the badge. She stood very still in that hallway. The juice box made a small crinkling sound in her fist. A nurse walked past. A cart rattled somewhere. The fluorescent lights hummed their indifferent hum. "Mrs. Kwan," the neurologist said carefully, "are you—" "I'm fine," she said. She was not fine. She was the furthest thing from fine. She was a black woman from Atlanta standing in a Seoul hospital being told that the car accident that had nearly killed her husband was not an accident at all, and that whoever was responsible had been careful, connected, and very motivated. But here was the thing about Nora Kwan that certain people had never understood, had never bothered to understand. She had dismissed the way they dismissed everything about her that didn't fit their version of the world. Nora did not leave. Not when her wedding gift had been returned unopened with a note that said, "This family does not accept charity." Not when she'd been excluded from 3 consecutive Kwan family holiday dinners and told the dates had simply been forgotten. Not when someone had stood in her own son's living room and said, in front of Nora, in front of Moon, who had been 4 years old and eating a snack at the kitchen counter, "Woo Bin, your grandfather is asking again why you haven't found someone appropriate to raise your child with." Moon had looked up from his crackers. He'd looked at the woman who said it. He'd looked at his mother. Then he'd slid off the stool, walked to Nora, taken her hand, and said, "Iyama, let's go to my room."
Ma, let's go to my
Not
room.
because he hadn't understood,
Okay, let's go.
but because even at 4, Moon Kwan had understood perfectly, and he had chosen, without hesitation, without instruction, exactly which side of this war he was standing on. That was the child Nora had raised. That was the marriage Nora had fought for. And now she was standing in a hospital hallway with a crumpled juice box and 43 seconds of security footage and a husband in room 412 who, when he had finally opened his eyes 4 days ago after 11 days of nothing, had looked at Nora's face, the face of the woman he had married, the face of the mother of his child, the face of the person he had told just 3 weeks ago that she was the best decision he had ever made, and had said, with complete and genuine blankness, "I'm sorry." Who are you?
Sorry, who are you?
The retrograde amnesia, the doctors explained, was severe but not uncommon in cases of
sorry, who
traumatic
are
brain injury at this level. His long-term memory had gaps, significant ones.
Sorry, who
He
are
remembered his childhood. He remembered the company. He remembered his mother, his sister
I'm
Gia,
sorry, who
the
are
house
you?
in Gangnam. He did not remember Nora. He did not remember Moon. 7
sorry,
years,
who are you?
gone. Nora had sat in the chair beside his bed and watched him look at her like a polite stranger and felt something in her chest go very, very quiet. Not broken, not yet, just quiet, the way a storm goes quiet before it decides what it's going to destroy. "Can you tell me your name?" the nurse had prompted gently. "Nora," she'd said. "I'm Nora. I'm your wife." He'd nodded the way you nod at someone giving directions in an unfamiliar city. Courteous, disconnected. His eyes had moved to the door, and Nora had understood with total clarity that he was hoping someone he recognized would walk through it. Someone did. She arrived 20 minutes later in a cream silk blouse and full makeup, moving through that hospital like she owned it, which she practically did. She walked into Woo Bin's room, saw her son's face light up with recognition, and turned to look at Nora with an expression that wasn't grief, wasn't relief, wasn't the face of a mother grateful her son was alive. It was something else entirely. Something Nora filed away carefully, the way she filed everything now. "Nora," Soo-yeon said, soft as silk over steel, You must be exhausted. Why don't you go home and rest? I'll stay with him. I'm fine, Nora said. The second time that day she'd said those words and meant the opposite. Moon needs his mother, Soo-yeon pressed. You should be with your son. And there it was, the move dressed as concern. Go be a mother. Go be elsewhere. Leave my son to me now that he doesn't know you exist. Nora looked at Woo-bin. He was watching the exchange with the politely uncomfortable expression of a man witnessing a disagreement between strangers. She picked up her bag. She walked out. But she did not go home. She went to find the neurologist. And when he slid that printed still across the table, the man, the badge, the 43 seconds that weren't supposed to exist, Nora looked at it for a long time. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. Not to a lawyer. Not exactly. 2 years ago, when the interference had started escalating and Woo-bin had been overseas for 6 weeks, and Nora had felt, for the first time, the specific chill of being alone in a war she hadn't started, she had made a quiet decision. She'd found someone, retained them, paid from her own account, told no one. She hadn't hired a lawyer, she'd activated one. Ji-yeon, she said when the call connected, it's time, bring everything. Then she texted Moon's babysitter. Lock the doors. Don't open for anyone you don't know. Anyone. Then Nora Kwon squared her shoulders, walked back down that hallway, and pushed open the door to room 412. Soo-yeon looked up from the chair beside Woo-bin's bed. Her expression moved through surprise, irritation, and recalculation in under a second. All of it happening behind a face trained for decades in the art of showing nothing. I thought you were leaving, she said. I live here, Nora said pleasantly. In Seoul. In this family. In that room. She nodded toward Woo-bin. With him. So no, I'm not leaving. Woo-bin looked between them with that careful, lost expression that broke Nora's heart a little more each time she saw it. Soo-yeon smiled. It didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. Of course, she said. And the war, which had been simmering for 6 years, which had survived exclusion and humiliation and 1,000 small cruelties dressed as culture and tradition, moved into its final phase. The first thing Soo-yeon did was change the access list. Nora found out at 6:47 the next morning when she arrived at the hospital with Moon's drawings, 6 of them, crayon on printer paper, each one labeled in Moon's careful 6-year-old handwriting. Appa, this is us at the beach. Appa, this is your favorite food. Appa, this is me. Please remember me. And the nurse at the front desk looked at her with genuine discomfort and said that Mrs. Kwon had updated the approved visitor list for room 412 and Nora's name was no longer on it. Nora stood at that desk for exactly 4 seconds. I'm his wife, she said. I understand, Mrs. Kwon, but the primary contact has... I am the primary contact, Nora said. I am his legal wife. My name is on his insurance, his emergency forms, his medical proxy. Pull any document in that file and tell me whose name you see. The nurse pulled the file. She saw whose name she saw. Nora was inside room 412 in under 3 minutes. Soo-yeon was already there, sitting in the chair that had become hers overnight, wearing another silk blouse, holding a cup of tea like she was receiving guests in her own home. Which, Nora understood now, was exactly how she saw it. Woo-bin's mind had been emptied and Soo-yeon had walked straight into the vacancy and started rearranging furniture. Woo-bin looked up when Nora entered. That same polite blankness, that same careful distance. Good morning, he said. Good morning, Nora said, and smiled at him the way she'd learned to smile in this family, warm on the surface, iron underneath. She set the drawings on his bedside table. Moon made these for you. He wanted you to have them. Something moved across Woo-bin's face, faint, unreadable. He looked at the drawings. Appa, please remember me. Moon, he said slowly, like he was testing the shape of the word. Your son, Nora said. He's 6. He has your stubborn streak and my inability to back down from an argument, which means we're all in serious trouble in about 10 years. Woo-bin almost smiled. Almost. Soo-yeon set down her tea. Nora, we should talk outside. We're fine in here, Nora said pleasantly. I think... He's my husband, Nora said, still pleasant, still smiling. Whatever you want to say to me, you can say in front of him. A beat of silence. Soo-yeon's jaw tightened by a fraction that most people wouldn't catch. Nora caught it. Fine, Soo-yeon said. I've spoken with the doctors. Given Woo-bin's condition, given that he doesn't remember the marriage, it would be less stressful for his recovery if I disappeared, Nora said. If you gave him space, Soo-yeon said smoothly. He has space. He has a whole hospital room full of space. Nora pulled up a chair and sat down directly beside Woo-bin's bed, close enough that the message was architectural. I am here. I am not moving. Try again. What he doesn't have is his memory, which the doctors tell me can return with time, familiarity, and consistent presence from people who are part of his actual life. She looked at Soo-yeon with a smile so serene it could have been framed. So I'll be staying. What Nora didn't say, what she kept tucked behind that smile like a card she wasn't ready to play yet, was what Ji-yeon had told her at 11 p.m. the night before in the hospital parking garage. Speaking quietly with the engine running because Ji-yeon was careful like that. The badge on the man in the footage belonged to a private security contractor. The contractor had 3 registered corporate clients in Seoul. 2 of them were multinationals with no connection to the Kwon family. The third had been dissolved 8 months ago. But its last registered director, before the dissolution, before the paperwork was quietly shuffled into obscurity, had been a man named Oh Tae-suk. Oh Tae-suk, who had been Kwon Soo-yeon's personal attorney for 19 years. It's not proof, Ji-yeon had said. Not yet. It's a thread. How long to pull it? Nora had asked. Depends on how many people she's paid to bury it. Pull it anyway, Ji-yeon had nodded. Then she'd said carefully, Nora, if this goes where I think it goes, she didn't just try to end the marriage, she tried to end him. Nora had sat with that for a long moment in the dark of the parking garage. I know, she'd said. That changes things. It changes everything, Nora had said, which is why we do this right. Moon called at 7:30 that morning while Nora was in the hospital cafeteria, forcing herself to eat something. Iyama. His voice was careful in the specific way it got careful when he was trying not to sound scared. Halmoni came to the house. Nora set down her fork. What? She came with 2 men. They had boxes. SEO Uni didn't let them in, but Halmoni said she had the right to come inside because it's the Kwon family house. A pause. Is it the Kwon family house, Ayama? Does that mean she can come in? Nora was already standing. You live in that house, Moon. I live in that house. Nobody comes in without my permission. SEO Uni did exactly the right thing. I told Halmoni that, Moon said. Nora stopped walking. You told her what? I went to the door, Moon said, with the calm delivery of a child who had absolutely no idea he'd just made his mother's heart simultaneously swell and seize. I told her that my Iyama is the one who decides who comes into our house, and my Iyama wasn't home, so she should come back when my Iyama is home. The cafeteria noise blurred around Nora for a moment. 6 years old. Baby, she said. Was that wrong? He asked. No, she said. That was exactly right. I'm coming home. Don't open the door again. Okay. A beat. Iyama? Yes. Did Appa remember yet? The question landed the way his questions always landed. Direct, unpadded, carrying more weight than any 6-year-old should have to carry. Not yet, Nora said. But we're going to help him, okay? That's our job right now. We're going to help him remember. Okay, Moon said. Then, I made him 6 more drawings. Can I come see him today? Nora thought about the visitor list, the silk blouse, the boxes Soo-yeon had brought to her house. Yes, she said. Today we're both going. She got home to find Soo-yeon still parked outside in a black car, waiting with the patience of someone who had decided that patience was its own form of aggression. When Nora's taxi pulled up, Soo-yeon stepped out. She was composed, unhurried, dressed like a board meeting. We should talk, she said. Rationally. I'm always rational, Nora said, paying the driver. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I'm making it exactly as hard as it needs to be, Nora said. She turned to face her mother-in-law fully in the morning light, On the pavement outside the house she had chosen with Woo-bin, had painted and furnished and filled with 6 years of living. He doesn't remember me right now. I understand that. It's devastating, and I understand that. But he is still my husband. Moon is still his son, and this is still our home. You don't get to use his injury to rewrite 7 years of his life. Soo-yeon looked at her for a long moment. He looked at you like a stranger, she said quietly. Doesn't that tell you something? It was a precision strike. Nora felt it land exactly where it was aimed. She smiled anyway. It tells me his brain is healing, Nora said, and that mine is working perfectly. She walked past Soo-yeon toward her front door. Don't come back without calling first. Behind her, she heard Soo-yeon say, soft and certain as a closing door, This isn't over. I know, Nora said without turning around. It's barely started. The hospital's family mediation counselor was a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Lim, who had a plant on her desk that was somehow thriving despite having no visible source of natural light, which Nora found either inspiring or deeply suspicious depending on the hour. Dr. Lim had called the meeting. Soo-yeon had requested it. Nora had agreed because refusing would have looked like fear, and Nora did not do fear. Not visibly. Not where Soo-yeon could see it and use it. They sat on opposite sides of Dr. Lim's desk like two countries that had stopped pretending they weren't at war. The goal here, Dr. Lim said carefully, is to determine what kind of environment will best support Mr. Kwan's recovery. His neurological team believes that calm, consistent, familiar presence is critical in cases like this. A conflict in the immediate environment can actively impede memory restoration. I completely agree, Soo-yeon said warmly, which is why I think it's important that Woo-bin is surrounded by people he actually recognizes during this sensitive time. He'll recognize me again, Nora said. That's how recovery works. But right now he's injured, Nora said. Not divorced. Dr. Lim made a small, careful note on her pad. Mrs. Kwan, the elder Mrs. Kwan, Dr. Lim began, and both women looked at her, and she visibly recalibrated. So, Yeon-si, you've expressed concern that Nora's presence is causing Mr. Kwan distress. Can you be specific about what you observed? He tensed when she entered the room, Soo-yeon said. He tenses when anyone enters the room, Nora said. He has a traumatic brain injury. He's in a hospital. The man tenses when the breakfast cart arrives. Dr. Lim pressed her lips together in a way that might have been suppressed amusement. Nora-si, you believe consistent presence will aid his recovery? I believe disappearing from his life while someone else fills the space will make recovery significantly harder, Nora said. Yes. And what about your son? Moon? Moon wants to see his father, Nora said. Woo-bin may not remember him right now, but Moon remembers everything. Every Saturday morning, every bedtime story, every inside joke. Moon is the single most powerful memory trigger that man has, and I will not keep him away from his father to make anyone more comfortable. Soo-yeon's composure flickered. Just once. Just for a second. It was enough. Nora filed it away. They brought Moon that afternoon. Nora had prepared him the way she prepared him for everything. Honestly, directly, without cushioning it so much that the truth got lost. Appa might not know your name when he sees you, she'd told him in the taxi. He might look at you the way he looked at me, like he's trying to remember a dream. Moon had considered this with his characteristic gravity. Does it hurt him, not remembering? I think it confuses him, Nora said, which is a little like hurt. Does it hurt you? Moon asked. When he doesn't remember? Nora looked at her son. His dark eyes, the serious set of his mouth, the way he asked questions that landed like small stones dropped into still water, sending rings out in every direction. Yes, she said, because he deserved the truth. But I'm okay, and we're going to fix it. Moon nodded. He reached into his backpack and checked that his drawings were still there. Satisfied, he zipped it back up and looked out the window. Iyama, he said. Yes. Halmoni called me this morning, on my tablet. Nora went very still. She called you directly? She said she just wanted to check on me. Moon's voice was neutral in the way it got when he was reporting facts he wasn't sure how to feel about yet. She said that sometimes when grown-ups are sad, they make bad decisions. She said you were sad, and that's why you were acting confused about things. The taxi hummed along the Seoul street. What did you say? Nora asked. I said my Iyama isn't confused, Moon said simply. She's the least confused person I know. He paused. Then I said I had to go because my cartoon was starting, but it wasn't actually starting. I just didn't want to talk to her anymore. Nora put her arm around her son and pulled him close and pressed her lips to the top of his head and stayed there for a moment. That's my boy, she said quietly. Woo Bin was sitting up when they arrived. Someone, Nora suspected Jia, his younger sister, who had been navigating this situation with the exhausted diplomacy of someone caught between two armies, had brought him a change of clothes and a book. He looked better than he had, less like a man adrift, more like a man trying to find shore. He looked up when the door opened. He looked at Nora. That familiar, polite distance. Then he looked at Moon. And something happened. Not recognition. Not the sudden cinematic rush of memory returning all at once. But something quieter and more fundamental than that. The way your body responds to something before your mind catches up. His expression didn't open exactly, but it softened. Something in his posture shifted. His hands, which had been resting still on the blanket, moved slightly toward the edge of the bed. Moon walked into the room like he owned it, which was entirely his father's energy, and Nora almost laughed. Hi, Appa, Moon said. He pulled a chair up to the bed without being told, climbed onto it, and set his backpack on his lap. I brought you things, because I think you need help remembering, and I'm good at remembering, so I'm going to help you. Woo Bin looked at this child, this small, serious, confident child. Okay, he said softly, like it was the only word available. Moon unzipped his bag and pulled out the drawings, laying them on the bed one by one with the careful ceremony of someone presenting evidence. This is us at Jeju. You burned the samgyeopsal, but you said it was supposed to be like that, and Iyama laughed so hard she cried. This is our living room. You always sit in the left corner of the couch. I don't know why. This is your coffee cup. It says World's Okayest Appa. I picked it. This is... You picked it? Woo Bin said. Moon looked up. Yes, for your birthday. I saved my allowance. He studied his father's face. Do you remember your birthday? I remember birthdays, Woo Bin said carefully. I don't remember that one specifically, Moon finished without judgment. That's okay. I remember it for both of us. He laid the next drawing down. This is the park near our house. We go on Saturdays. You always race me to the big tree and you always let me win, but you think I don't know that. A pause. I know that. Something moved across Woo Bin's face, complicated and private and too quick to name. You're very observant, he said. I'm your son, Moon said with the simple certainty of someone stating a law of physics. Of course I am. Nora stood near the door and watched her husband look at their child and felt the specific ache of loving someone who was trying to find their way back to you from somewhere very far away. Then Soo-yeon walked in. She stopped when she saw Moon. Something moved across her face, not warmth, not the reflex softness of a grandmother seeing her grandchild. Calculation, the brief recalibration of someone whose plan has encountered an obstacle she hadn't fully accounted for. Moona, she said, it recovering quickly. What a surprise! Hi, Halmoni, Moon said, with the perfectly calibrated politeness of a child who had been raised to be respectful, even when he didn't want to be. He turned back to his father. He continued laying out his drawings. Soo-yeon looked at Nora. Nora looked back at her with an expression she'd spent 6 years perfecting. Open, pleasant, utterly immovable. He's good with him, Jia said quietly from the corner, where she'd been sitting so still Nora had almost forgotten she was there. She was watching Moon with something that looked like wonder. He talks to him like nothing is wrong. Nothing is wrong, Moon said, without looking up from his drawings, apparently having the hearing of a small satellite dish. Appa's brain is resting. It'll wake up. Brains do that. He looked at his father. Right. Appa? Woo Bin looked at his son for a long moment. Right, he said. And for the first time since he'd opened his eyes in that hospital bed, he sounded like he meant something. That night, Nora got the first piece of real information from an unexpected source. Gia called her at 10 p.m. "I need to tell you something," Woo Bin's sister said without preamble, "and I need you to not tell anyone I told you yet, because I'm still figuring out what I know and what I can prove and what it means." Nora sat down on the edge of her bed. Moon was asleep down the hall, his 7 drawings for tomorrow already stacked neatly on his desk. "Tell me," Nora said. A breath. Then, "The week before the accident, Woo Bin called me. He said he'd found something in the company accounts. Something that traced back to Iyama's private accounts." Another breath. "He said he was going to confront her. He said," Gia's voice cracked slightly, "he said he was scared of what she'd do." The room was very quiet. "He told you he was scared of her," Nora said. "Yes, and then a week later his brakes failed." Silence. "Gia," Nora said carefully, "what did he find in those accounts?" "I don't know exactly," Gia said, "but I know where he kept his files." The files were in a cloud storage account that Woo Bin had set up 3 years ago under an email address Nora had never seen before. She knew about it because Gia had found the login details written in the back of a notebook Woo Bin kept in his home office, the one with the dark green cover that looked like every other notebook on his shelf, except for the small star he'd drawn in the bottom right corner of the spine. Gia had found it the day after their phone call, had photographed the page, and had sent it to Nora at 6 a.m. with a message that said simply, "I'm scared too, but I'm more scared of what happens if we do nothing." Nora had stared at that message for a long time. Then she'd forwarded it to Ji-yeon. By noon, Ji-yeon had accessed the account. By 2 p.m. she'd called Nora and told her to sit down. "How bad?" Nora asked. "Define bad," Ji-yeon said. Ji-yeon. "There are 3 years of financial records," Ji-yeon said. "Transfers, contracts, shell company structures. Woo Bin had been building a case file, methodically, like he knew he'd need evidence eventually." A pause. "Nora, your mother-in-law has been embezzling from Kwan Logistics for at least 4 years. We're talking about significant sums redirected through a company that technically doesn't exist into accounts that trace back to Oh Tai-suk," Nora's lawyer. The dissolved company, the badge on the man in the footage. The thread Ji-yeon had started pulling was now a rope. "There's more," Ji-yeon said. "Of course there is," Nora said. "Woo Bin's notes indicate he believed his mother was planning to force him out of the company, replace him with a board she could control. He wrote," a pause while Ji-yeon presumably found the exact line. "He wrote, 'She built this quietly for years. I was blind to it because she's my mother. I don't think she'll stop at business.'" The room tilted slightly. "I don't think she'll stop at business." He'd known. Not everything, not the specific shape of what was coming, but he'd felt the edges of it. He'd been afraid. He'd been building a case. And then his brakes had failed on the highway and he'd spent 11 days in a coma and he'd woken up without the memory of any of it. The timing wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. "Ji-yeon," Nora said. "How long before we can take this to someone?" "Carefully done. 2 weeks. Rushed. We risk her knowing we have it before we can use it." 2 weeks, Nora said. She could do 2 weeks. She'd survived 7 years. What she hadn't accounted for was what Soo-yeon would do in those 2 weeks. The first move came 3 days later, delivered not through confrontation, Soo-yeon was too precise for that, but through paperwork. A letter arrived from a family law firm Nora didn't recognize, addressed to her, informing her that given the circumstances of Mr. Kwan's medical condition and his current inability to confirm the validity or status of his marriage, a petition had been filed to have Nora's access to joint marital assets temporarily frozen pending a competency review. Nora read the letter twice. Then she called Ji-yeon. "She's trying to freeze the accounts," she said. "I see it," Ji-yeon said. She'd already been forwarded a copy somehow, which was one of the things Nora deeply appreciated about her lawyer. The woman had sources the way some people had houseplants, everywhere, quietly thriving. "It won't hold. You have documented legal standing as his spouse, but it'll take 10 days to contest, and during those 10 days, "I won't have access to the joint account," Nora said. "Do you have personal accounts?" "Yes." "Enough to cover the household for 10 days?" "Yes." Barely. But yes. Then we let her think this worked, Ji Yeon said. Don't contest it immediately. Let her feel like she scored. Overconfident people make faster mistakes. Nora hated this. She hated the patience required, the calculated stillness, the performance of being more affected than she was. She was a woman who'd built her life on saying exactly what she meant, exactly when she meant it. And this chess match played in whispers and paperwork, felt like wearing a coat 3 sizes too small. But she thought about Woo Bin's notes. I don't think she'll stop at business. She thought about Moon, asking if Appa had remembered yet. She put on the coat. The second move came from a direction she hadn't anticipated. She was at the hospital. She was always at the hospital now, structured visits, always with Moon when she could manage it, because whatever else was happening, those visits were working. Woo Bin was talking more. He'd started asking questions. Small ones at first. Where does Moon go to school? What does he like? Is he always this serious? And then slightly larger ones that he delivered quietly, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to ask them. What was I like? He'd asked Nora 2 days ago. When Moon had fallen asleep in the chair beside his bed, drawings scattered across his lap. Nora had looked at him, her husband, the man who'd held her hand through a turbulent flight to Busan and quietly translated menus and learned to make her mother's cornbread recipe, badly, enthusiastically, repeatedly until he got it right. You were annoying, she said. He blinked. You had an opinion about everything, she said. The correct way to load a dishwasher, the superior method for folding a fitted sheet. You were convinced you knew a faster route to everywhere even when you were demonstrably wrong, which was often. She held his gaze. You were also the kindest person in any room you walked into. You were steady. You thought before you spoke, which I've never been able to do. You made me feel... She paused. Choosing carefully. Like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, which is not a feeling I'd had a lot before you. Woo Bin was quiet for a long time. We were happy? He asked. Yes, she said. We were happy. He looked at Moon, the slow rise and fall of their sleeping sun. Okay, he said softly. She didn't know what it meant. She held it anyway. So she was not prepared, 2 days later, when she arrived at the hospital to find a woman sitting with Woo Bin that she'd never seen before. Early 30s, polished, Korean. Sitting in Nora's chair, not deliberately, probably, but the specific location of it felt like a statement, leaning slightly toward Woo Bin with the body language of someone entirely comfortable in the space she occupied. Woo Bin looked up when Nora entered. That familiar expression, still working toward recognition, still not quite there yet, but warmer than it had been. Then he looked between Nora and the woman, and something shifted. Nora, he said, this is Lee Soo-jin. She's an old friend, the woman said with a smile that was entirely too practiced. We grew up together. Our families are close. She looked at Nora with that smile and something behind it that was the exact same temperature as a certain silk blouse. Soo Yeon-si thought it might help him to see familiar faces. Nora understood the entire move in under 4 seconds. She was being replaced, not just in the hospital room, not just in the accounts. In the story Soo Yeon was rewriting, the one where Woo Bin had no wife, had never chosen Nora. I had a whole other life waiting for him to step back into. This woman was a character, a placed piece, a suggestion wearing a smile. Nora pulled up a chair. She sat down on the other side of Woo Bin's bed. Any friend of the family, she said warmly, is welcome to visit. How long are you in Seoul? The woman blinked. She'd expected something else. Flight, maybe. Frost. Not this. A few weeks, she said. Lovely, Nora said. She turned to Woo Bin. Moon drew you something new. Want to see? And she proceeded to spend the next 40 minutes being so entirely, genuinely present that Lee Soo-jin eventually ran out of things to say and left 20 minutes before she'd planned to, with a smile that had developed a crack in it. When she was gone, Woo Bin looked at Nora. You didn't like her, he said. I don't know her, Nora said. That's not what I said. Nora looked at her husband. Something in his eyes. sharper than it had been, more focused, more like him. "No," she said carefully. "I didn't like the reason she was here." A beat. "Neither did I," Woo Bin said quietly. Nora went very still. "You knew?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I don't have my memory," he said slowly. "But I'm not—" He paused, finding the words. "I'm not empty. I still have instincts, and something about today felt wrong." He looked at his hands. "Something about a lot of things lately feels wrong." Nora's heart was doing something complicated and hopeful and terrifying. "Like what?" she asked. He looked at her for a long time. "Like why?" he said. "Would someone work this hard to convince me that the woman who comes every day with my son's drawings isn't supposed to be here?" Nora drove home that evening with the windows down despite the October chill, because she needed the cold air on her face to stay grounded in reality and not float away into the dangerous territory of hope that Woo Bin's words had opened up. "Why would someone work this hard to convince me that the woman who comes every day with my son's drawings isn't supposed to be here?" He didn't remember her. Not yet. But he was watching. He was thinking. The man she'd married, the one with opinions about dishwashers and faster routes and the correct way to fold a fitted sheet, was still in there, still running, still noticing things that didn't add up. That was everything. That was enough. She pulled into her driveway and sat in the car for a moment, letting herself feel it. The fragile, complicated thing that was not quite relief and not quite joy, but something adjacent to both. Then she got out, went inside, and found Moon at the kitchen table doing homework with the particular expression of someone who found long division personally offensive. "How's Appa?" he asked without looking up. "Getting sharper," Nora said. Moon looked up at that. His eyes searched her face with an accuracy that still caught her off guard. He read her the way she read documents, looking for what was actually being said underneath the surface. "Sharp like he's remembering?" he asked. "Sharp like he's paying attention," Nora said, "which is the step before remembering." Moon considered this with the gravity of a very small scientist evaluating new data. "Good," he said. Then he looked back at his homework. "Iyama, why does long division exist?" "To build character," Nora said. "I have enough character," Moon said. "You really do," Nora agreed, kissing the top of his head. "Finish it anyway." The call came at 11 p.m. Not Ji-yeon this time, not Jia. It was a number she didn't recognize and she almost let it go to voicemail. And then something, instinct or 7 years of never ignoring the thing that felt important, made her answer. "Mrs. Kwan." The voice was male, older, careful. "My name is Han Dong-wook. I'm a former financial director at Kwan Logistics. I worked there for 11 years. I was asked to leave 14 months ago." Nora sat up straighter. "Why are you calling me?" "Because I heard what happened to Woo Bin-si," the man said. "Wait, and because I've been carrying something for 14 months that I should have done something about sooner, and I'm tired of carrying it." "What are you carrying?" Nora asked. A breath. "Proof," he said, "real proof. Not threads, not circumstantial. Documents I kept when I left because I knew something was wrong and I knew I'd need protection." A pause. So-yeon-si didn't just embezzle from the company. She's been systematically transferring Kwan Logistics assets into a separate entity she controls. She's been doing it for 5 years. When Woo Bin-si started asking questions about the quarterly reports 8 months ago, she told me to alter the records. I refused. 2 weeks later, I was gone. Nora's hand tightened on the phone. "Why come to me?" she said. "Why not go directly to authorities?" "Because I went to Oh Tae-suk first," Han Dong-wook said flatly. "Before I understood he was her attorney. He assured me the irregularities were being handled internally. Then I was dismissed. I didn't realize until later that I'd essentially announced myself to the enemy." His voice dropped. "I've been watching to see who else was paying attention. You've had Ji-yeon Park on retainer for 2 years. She's good. She's careful. That told me you already knew something was wrong. That told me you were someone I could trust." Nora was quiet for a moment. "Can you meet with my lawyer tomorrow?" she said. "Yes," he said immediately, like he'd been waiting to say it for 14 months. Don't contact anyone else before then, Nora said. Not about this. Nobody. Understood. She hung up and sat in the dark of her bedroom for a long moment. Then she thought about something Wu Bin had written in his notes. She built this quietly for years. I was blind to it because she's my mother. He hadn't been blind because he was foolish. He'd been blind because he'd loved her. Because the thing about people who weaponize love is that they understand it well enough to use it as cover, and the people who love most genuinely are always the last to see it. She picked up her phone and sent Ji-yeon a message. We have a witness. Call me first thing. Then she lay down, stared at the ceiling, and let herself think about the full shape of what they were building. The footage, the files, the dissolved company, Oh Tai-suk, and now a former financial director with documents and a reason to talk. It was enough. It was almost enough. She just needed 2 more things. She needed Wu Bin to remember, and she needed to get through whatever Soo-yeon was planning next before it arrived. It arrived the next morning in the form of a school pickup. Nora was at the meeting with Ji-yeon and Han Dong-wook when her phone lit up with a call from Moon's school, not the main office, but his classroom teacher, which was unusual enough to make her excuse herself immediately. Mrs. Kwon, I'm so sorry to bother you, the teacher said. But Moon's grandmother came to collect him this afternoon. She said there was a family emergency and you'd sent her. We called the office to verify and— I didn't send her, Nora said. A pause. Moon is still here, the teacher said quickly. He refused to go. He told us— Another pause. And Nora could hear something in the teacher's voice that was surprised and not entirely unhappy about what she was about to report. He told us that his Iyama always picks him up herself or sends his babysitter Seo Unni, and that nobody else was authorized, and that he'd like to wait in the office until you arrived. Nora was already standing, already reaching for her bag. Tell him I'm 12 minutes away, she said. Of course. The teacher hesitated. Mrs. Kwon, he's a remarkable child. I know, Nora said. I'll be there in 10. She made it in 9. Moon was sitting in the school office in his uniform, backpack on his lap, with the composed expression of someone who had made a decision and was entirely at peace with it. Soo-yeon was gone. She'd left when it became clear Moon wasn't moving, but the school administrator was still visibly flustered, shuffling papers with the energy of someone who had witnessed something they weren't sure how to categorize. Moon saw Nora come through the door and something in his posture relaxed by a fraction so small most people wouldn't have caught it. She caught it. She always caught it. She crouched down in front of him. You okay? She said. Yes, he said. I told them the protocol. You told them the protocol, Nora repeated. You always say, if something feels wrong, trust that feeling and wait for you. He looked at her steadily. It felt wrong, so I waited. Nora looked at her son, his serious dark eyes, the set of his jaw that was entirely Wu Bin's, the quiet certainty that was something she recognized as her own blood running through him. She pulled him into a hug. He let her, which was its own kind of gift from a 6-year-old with opinions about public displays of affection. She tried to take me, he said quietly into her shoulder. Didn't she? It wasn't really a question. Nora held him tighter. She didn't take you, she said, and she won't. Moon pulled back and looked at her with an expression that was too old for his face and exactly right for who he was. Iyama, he said, we need to finish this. Nora looked at her 6-year-old son. I know, baby, she said. We're close. How close? She thought about Han Dong-wook's documents, about Ji-yeon's 2 weeks, about Wu Bin's eyes getting sharper by the day, about the thread that had become a rope that had become something you could build a case around. Close enough, she said. That evening, she brought Moon to the hospital. He had 7 new drawings. He also had, tucked at the bottom of his backpack, a small photograph that Nora hadn't known he'd brought until he pulled it out and laid it on his father's bedside table with the same careful ceremony he gave everything. It was a family photo, the 3 of them at Jeju 2 summers ago. Wu Bin had Moon on his shoulders. Nora was laughing at something off camera. The light was gold and easy, and everyone in the frame looked like people who had no idea how good they had it. Woo Bin looked at the photograph for a very long time. Moon watched him look at it. "That's us," Moon said quietly. "That's what we are. In case you need to see it." Something in Woo Bin's face shifted, deep and private and seismic in the way of things that happen below the surface before they break through. His hand moved to the photograph. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, very quietly, he said, "Jeju. We went in August." Nora's breath stopped. Moon went absolutely still. "You burned the Samgyeopsal," Moon whispered. "And I said it was supposed to be like that," Woo Bin said slowly, like a man reading words in a language he's just remembered he knows. His eyes were fixed on the photograph. His voice was distant and close at the same time. "And you," he looked at Nora, "you laughed until I cried," Nora said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Yes." Woo Bin looked at her, really looked at her. Not the polite stranger's look, not the careful, disconnected gaze of a man trying to place a face. Something else, something that made Nora's heart do something violent and hopeful in her chest. "Nora," he said, just her name. But the way he said it, like it was a door opening from the inside. Right then her phone buzzed. "Ji-yeon, one message. We have everything. It's time." She stepped into the hallway to take the call. Ji-yeon's voice was controlled in the specific way it got when she was holding something significant and didn't want to drop it by moving too fast. "Han Dong-wook's documents are everything he said they were," she said. 5 years of asset transfers, 43 shell transactions. The dissolved company connects directly to 3 of them, and the security contractor, the one from the footage, received 2 payments from that company in the 60 days before the accident. Nora leaned against the hallway wall. 2 payments, she said. The first one, we think, was for surveillance, tracking Woo Bin's movements, his schedule, which car he used, which route he took. A pause. The second payment was made 4 days before the crash. The hallway hummed around her. A cart rattled past. Someone's visitor laughed too loudly at the end of the corridor. "Ji-yeon," Nora said carefully, "when you say we have everything—" "I mean we have enough to take to a prosecutor," Ji-yeon said. "Financial fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit. What happened to Woo Bin? All of it. We can move." Another pause. "But Nora, I need you to understand what moving means. Once we file this, it becomes public. The Kwon family name is attached to a criminal investigation. Woo Bin's company faces scrutiny. It gets loud and it gets messy and it doesn't get messy." "I know," Nora said. "And Woo Bin still doesn't have his full memory. He can't—" "He remembered something tonight," Nora said. "He's coming back." A silence. "How much?" Ji-yeon asked. "Enough," Nora said. "Enough to know he's in there. Enough to know that when the rest comes back, and it will, I need this already handled. I need her already answered for. Because when he remembers everything, I don't want him to have to fight this on top of processing what she did to him." Ji-yeon was quiet for a moment. "You're protecting him," she said. "I'm his wife," Nora said. "That's what I do." "Okay," Ji-yeon said. "Then we move in the morning." She went back into room 412. Woo Bin was still holding the photograph. Moon had fallen asleep again. He did this with the complete commitment of a child who had decided that his father's hospital room was a perfectly acceptable place to take a nap, and Woo Bin had at some point, without apparently deciding to, placed his hand gently on Moon's back the way you place a hand on something you're afraid might disappear. Nora stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at them. Then she walked in quietly and sat down. Woo Bin looked at her. That new look, the one that had started cracking through the blankness like light under a door. "How much do you remember?" she asked softly, so as not to wake Moon. He was quiet for a moment. "Fragments," he said. Not a full picture. More like—" He paused, searching. "Like I can feel the shape of things even when I can't see them clearly. The trip to Jeju, the way you laugh. Something about—" He looked at his hands. "Something about cornbread." Nora made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Your mother-in-law's cornbread recipe," she said. "You tried to learn it. You made it 7 times before you got it right." "Was the 7th one right?" "The 7th one was extraordinary," she said. Which you knew, so you made me try it 3 times before you'd admit you were happy with it. Something moved across his face that was almost, the expression she knew. The one that was private and warm and entirely his. That sounds like me, he said quietly. It is you, she said. He looked at Moon. He called me Appa today, he said. Not like a question, just like a fact. It is a fact, Nora said. I know, he said. And there was something in his voice, something settled and certain that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. I know it's a fact. I can feel that it's a fact even without the memory. He paused. Is that strange? No, she said. I think that's your instincts working before your memory catches up. He nodded slowly. Then, Nora. Yes. Something is wrong with my mother. The room went very quiet. Nora looked at her husband. He was still looking at Moon, his hand still resting on their son's back, his voice still low and careful. But his jaw was set in a way she recognized. Woobin doing what Woobin did when he'd reached a conclusion he didn't want but couldn't avoid. I've been watching her, he said, for the last week. The way she talks about you, the way she talks around you, the things she says to the nurses, to the doctors, small things, framing things, the way she looks when you walk in. He paused. And the woman she brought, Lee Soo-jin, that wasn't a concern for my recovery. He looked at Nora finally. What do you know? Nora held his gaze. This was the moment. She could soften it. She could say, let's talk about this when you're stronger, or I don't want to overwhelm you, or any number of careful protective phrases that would delay the truth and protect him from something he'd already, in the marrow of him, started to sense. She thought about what he'd written. I was blind to it because she's my mother. He wasn't blind anymore. A lot, she said. I know a lot, and tomorrow some of what I know is going to become official. He absorbed this. The accident, he said. Not a question. Yes, she said. A long silence. She tried to kill me, he said. Still not a question. The flat, devastated recognition of a man who already knew and had been waiting for someone to confirm it. We believe so, Nora said. Ji-yeon is filing tomorrow. There's financial fraud as well, years of it. Woobin, she leaned forward. You found it. Before the accident. You'd been building a case for months. You kept files in a cloud account. Jia found the login details. Something shifted violently in his expression. Jia, he said. She came to me, Nora said. She's on our side. She's scared, but she's on our side. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were wet in a way he was clearly refusing to acknowledge. My own mother, he said. I know, Nora said. She used my injury. Yes. She tried to take Moon. Nora went still. How do you know about that? He looked at her. Moon told me. Yesterday. He said Halmoni came to his school and he told the teacher the protocol. Something flickered in his face, grief and pride arriving at the same time. He said, Iyama taught me the protocol, Appa. I knew what to do. Nora's throat tightened. He's 6 years old, Woobin said quietly, and he's been protecting you. We've been protecting each other, Nora said. Woobin looked at her for a long time. I'm sorry, he said, for not being there, for all of it, not just the accident, for all the years before, the things my family put you through. I know I loved you. I can feel that I loved you even through all the fog. His voice was low and unsteady. I'm sorry you had to fight this alone. I wasn't alone, Nora said. She glanced at Moon. I had the best backup. Woobin looked at their sleeping son. Yeah, he said softly. You did. The next morning, Ji-yeon filed. By noon, Kwon Soo-yeon had been contacted by prosecutors. By 2 p.m., the story had broken. Quietly at first. Then, with the gathering velocity of something that had been held underwater for too long, finally surfacing. Nora was at the hospital when Soo-yeon arrived. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected lawyers, deflection, strategic silence. She hadn't expected Soo-yeon to walk into room 412 in the same cream silk she'd worn the first day, as though the armor still worked, as though the shape of authority she'd carried for decades could hold against what was now in motion. Woo Bin was sitting up. He'd been moved off the monitors 2 days ago. He looked for the first time like a man in a hospital room rather than a man the hospital room was holding together. He looked at his mother when she walked in. She looked at him, and something passed between them. Something private and irreversible. The specific silence of a relationship that has just crossed a threshold it can't uncross. "Woo Bin ah," she started. "Don't," he said. His voice was quiet, not angry, not wounded, just absolute. Soo-yeon stopped. "I don't have my full memory," he said. "But I have enough. And what I don't have in memory, I have in evidence. And what I don't have in evidence, I have in the way my wife looks when someone has been hurting her for years and she refuses to say how much." He held his mother's gaze. "I know what you did." Soo-yeon's composure, the impeccable lifelong composure of a woman who had never once let anyone see her break, developed a fracture so small and so total that it changed her face entirely. "I did what I thought was best for this family," she said. "You tried to kill me," Woo Bin said. The word landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. Soo-yeon said nothing. "Get out," Woo Bin said, "and don't come back here. Not to this room, not to my home, not to my son's school." His voice didn't waver. "Your lawyers will hear from mine." Soo-yeon looked at Nora. Nora said nothing. She didn't need to. Soo-yeon walked out. The room held the silence she left behind for a long moment. Then Moon, who had been sitting so still in the corner that everyone had forgotten he was there, looked up from his drawings and said, with the devastating matter-of-factness of a child who had just watched a war end, "Is she gone?" "Yes," Woo Bin said. "Good," Moon said, and went back to his drawing. The thing about a war ending is that nobody tells you what to do with the quiet afterward. Nora had spent 6 years in combat mode, reading rooms, filing information, building walls and strategies and contingencies, sleeping with one ear open and one eye on the door. It had become so habitual that she'd stopped noticing she was doing it. It had just become the shape of her days. Wake up, assess the threat level, protect what mattered, repeat. And now Soo-yeon was gone, the prosecutors were moving, Ji-yeon was handling the legal machinery with the focused efficiency of someone who had been waiting 2 years to fully unleash herself on a problem, and Woo Bin was sitting in a hospital room getting sharper by the hour, and Nora didn't know what to do with her hands. She was standing in the hospital cafeteria on a Tuesday morning staring at a cup of coffee she'd poured 10 minutes ago and hadn't touched when Gia found her. Woo Bin's younger sister had been a complicated figure throughout all of this. Not complicit, not quite courageous, occupying the difficult middle ground of someone who loved both sides of a war and kept getting burned by the crossfire. She'd come through in the end. The notebook, the phone call at 10 p.m., the willingness to say, "I'm scared too," when it would have been much easier to stay silent. Nora had not forgotten that. Gia sat down across from her without asking. She wrapped both hands around her own coffee cup and looked at Nora with the expression of someone who had a speech prepared and was deciding whether to give it. "Say it," Nora said. Gia almost smiled. "You sound like Woo Bin." "He sounds like me," Nora said. "I was here first." Gia looked down at her coffee. "I should have come to you sooner," she said. "When he called me that week before the accident, when he told me he was scared, I should have called you immediately. I should have, I don't know, done something. Instead, I just..." She pressed her lips together. "I waited. I told myself it was complicated, that I didn't want to get involved, that maybe it would resolve itself." "It almost resolved itself permanently," Nora said. "I know." Gia's voice was low. "I know, and I have to live with that." She looked up. "I'm sorry, Nora. Not the polite kind of sorry, the real kind." Nora looked at her sister-in-law. This woman who had watched 6 years of her family's cruelty toward Nora from the careful distance of someone who never wanted to choose sides and had ended up choosing anyway, in the only moment that truly counted. "You chose right when it mattered most," Nora said. "That notebook saved everything. So did that phone call." She picked up her coffee. "We're okay, Gia." Gia exhaled. Something in her shoulders released that had clearly been held there for a long time. He's remembering more, she said. Every day. The doctors say the pattern is accelerating. Once the brain starts making those connections again, it tends to snowball, Nora said. Yes, Gia hesitated. He asked me about your first date yesterday. Nora looked up. He asked you? He said he could feel that it was a good memory, but he couldn't see it clearly yet, and he wanted the details before they came back so he could… Gia paused, her mouth doing something soft. So he could feel ready for it when it arrived. Nora sat with that for a moment. Woo Bin, preparing to receive his own memories back, wanting to be ready. That was so entirely, specifically him, that it made her chest ache with something that wasn't grief anymore. What did you tell him? She asked. I told him to ask you, Gia said. Obviously. She did tell him. That afternoon, while Moon was at school and the hospital room was quiet and the October light came through the window at the angle that turned everything briefly gold, Nora sat beside Woo Bin's bed and told him about their first date. The small gallery in Insadong where she'd been working a temporary contract, the artist who hadn't shown up, the opening that was about to collapse, and the man who'd walked in off the street because he'd seen the light through the window and been curious. Who was curious about everything, as she'd learn, in the specific way of people who find the world genuinely interesting rather than performing interest because it's attractive. He'd helped her hang the last 4 pieces. He'd been terrible at it. He'd been funny about being terrible at it, which was more useful. He'd stayed for the whole opening, talked to every guest, sold 2 pieces by sheer conversational enthusiasm, and then asked her to dinner with the directness of someone who had decided something and saw no reason to be indirect about it. You said, Nora told him, that you'd just spent 3 hours helping hang an art show, so technically you'd already done the hard part of the date, and dinner was just the paperwork. Woo Bin was quiet for a moment. Then something broke open in his expression. Slow and total, like a window suddenly filled with light. And he made a sound that was almost a laugh, low and private and completely, entirely his. That's terrible, he said. It was extremely terrible, Nora agreed. I said yes immediately. He looked at her. That look again, the one that had been building for days, getting clearer and closer, like a photograph developing in real time. But more now. Sharper. Like the distance was finally closing. Nora, he said. Yes. I remember the gallery. She went very still. I remember. The light, he said slowly. The way the light came through the front window. And you, his voice changed. You were in the back trying to reach a hook that was too high and you were too stubborn to get a step stool and You got the step stool, Nora said. Her voice was not entirely steady. Without being asked, you just went and got it and handed it to me. And you looked at me like… He stopped. Like what? She whispered. Like I'd done something remarkable, he said, just by paying attention. The gold light held them both for a moment. That's when I knew, Nora said quietly. That's when I knew you were different. Woo Bin reached across the space between them and took her hand. Not tentatively, not like a stranger making a careful gesture, like a man who knew exactly where his hand was supposed to be and had just remembered it. Nora looked down at their joined hands. Then she looked at him. Hi, she said softly, because it felt like the right word, like a door opening from the inside. Hi, he said, and smiled. And it was his smile, the real one, the private one, the one she'd been waiting weeks to see come home. She didn't cry. She'd promised herself she wouldn't cry in this hospital room, not from joy, not from relief, not from the overwhelming specific feeling of something precious being returned to her that she'd been holding the space for without knowing if it would ever come back. She lasted approximately 4 seconds. He wasn't fully recovered. The doctors were careful about that. Memory returning was not the same as memory restored, and there were still gaps, still moments where he reached for something and found absence instead of image. But the snowball was rolling. Every day brought more. The cornbread, Moon's first steps, the apartment they'd lived in before the house, with the radiator that made a sound like someone learning to play the trombone at 3 a.m. The trip to Atlanta to meet her mother, who had looked at Woo Bin for 30 seconds and then said, "Well, you'll do," which was the highest praise in her mother's vocabulary and which Woo Bin had treated as a formal honor ever since. He was coming back. And as he came back, the full shape of what had been done to him arrived with it. Nora watched him process it in pieces, the way you can only process something enormous, not all at once, but in installments, each one landing separately and being absorbed before the next one arrived. The embezzlement he'd discovered, the confrontation he'd been preparing for, the fear he'd expressed to Gia, and then the accident that had not been an accident. He didn't talk about it much. That was his way. She knew his way now, had learned it over years. He processed inward first, came outward only when the shape of the thing was clear to him. She didn't push. She just stayed present, which was what she'd always done and what she would always do. But one evening, 4 days after he'd taken her hand in the gold light, he said, "I want to talk to the prosecutors." "Okay," Nora said. "I want to give them my testimony, what I found in the accounts, what I told Gia, everything I can remember." "Ji-yeon can facilitate that," Nora said. "She's been waiting." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "She's my mother, Nora." "I know," Nora said. "And she tried to kill me." "I know. Both of those things are true at the same time," he said. "And I don't—" He stopped. "I don't know how to hold both of those things." Nora thought about this carefully because it deserved care. "I think," she said slowly, "you hold them the same way you hold anything that's true and terrible at the same time. You don't try to make one of them less true to make the other easier. You just carry them both. And you let the people who love you help you carry them." He looked at her for a long moment. "When did you get wise?" he said. "I've always been wise," she said. "You just didn't have the memory to confirm it." He laughed. A real one, full and unguarded and so familiar it was almost unbearable. From the doorway, Moon's voice arrived like a small thunderclap. "Appa's laughing." He said it with the satisfaction of someone whose experiment had produced exactly the expected result. He walked in, dropped his backpack, and climbed onto the bed beside his father with the casual confidence of someone reclaiming territory that had always been his. "I told you the drawings would work, Iama." "You did tell me that," Nora said. "I have a very good brain," Moon said. "You have your father's arrogance," Nora said. "And your stubbornness," Woo Bin said. "That's called determination," Moon said with great dignity. Woo Bin put his arm around his son. Moon leaned into him like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because it was. Kwon Soo-yeon was formally charged on a Thursday. Nora found out from Ji-yeon at 8 a.m., standing in her kitchen making Moon's breakfast, and the call was brief and precise, the way Ji-yeon was always brief and precise. Financial fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm, the specific legal language that turned years of quiet cruelty and one catastrophic act of violence into something the world could now see clearly and name correctly. She stood at the kitchen counter after the call ended and looked at the eggs she was scrambling and felt, not triumph, not the clean satisfaction she'd imagined during the long nights when she'd lain awake building this case in her head brick by brick. Something quieter than that. Something that felt more like the moment after a very long storm when the air goes still and you walk outside and find that your house is still standing. Moon appeared in the kitchen doorway in his school uniform, one sock on, one sock in his hand, regarding her with his standard issue morning assessment. "Good news or serious news?" he said. He'd developed this taxonomy somewhere around age 4. The idea that his mother's face had 2 distinct expressions that both looked like calm but meant different things. "Both," Nora said. He considered this. "Does it mean we won?" Nora looked at her son. "Yes," she said. "It means we won." Moon nodded once with the quiet gravity of a general receiving a battlefield report. Then he sat down at the kitchen table, put on his second sock, and said, "Can I have extra kimbap in my lunch today?" "Celebrations require extra kimbap." Nora laughed. The real kind, the unguarded kind, the kind that started somewhere deep and came up with force. "Yes," she said. "You can have extra kimbap." Woo Bin was discharged from the hospital 11 days later. He wasn't fully recovered. The doctors were consistent about that, and Nora had made peace with consistent. Full recovery was a direction, not a destination, and the direction was unambiguously forward. The gaps were smaller now, the missing pieces fewer. Some things had come back with the sudden completeness of a light switching on. Others were returning more slowly, in fragments and impressions, arriving at odd hours. In the middle of dinner, in the quiet after Moon fell asleep. Once in the early morning when Woo Bin would lie still and Nora could tell by his breathing that something had just surfaced. She never rushed it. She never performed patience about it either, which she suspected he appreciated more. She just lived alongside the recovery the way she'd lived alongside everything in this marriage, fully present, entirely committed, refusing to pretend things were different than they were. He came home on a Tuesday. Moon had made a sign. It said, "Welcome home, Appa. I kept your side of the couch warm. Not really, you have long legs and it's uncomfortable." Woo Bin stood in the doorway of his own house and read it, and laughed so hard he had to put his hand on the doorframe. "I have long legs?" he said. "Extremely," Nora said. "It's been a whole thing." Moon appeared from behind the couch where he had been waiting with what he clearly believed was masterful subtlety. "Welcome home, Appa," he said, with all the dignity of someone who had not just been crouching behind furniture for 10 minutes. Woo Bin crossed the room and picked his son up and held him, and Moon, who had opinions about public displays of affection and had been known to formally object to being hugged in front of his friends, wrapped both arms around his father's neck and held on. Nora stood in the hallway of her home and let herself have the moment fully, without armor, without strategy, without the part of her brain that had been running threat assessments for 6 consecutive years. Just this, just them. Just the house she'd refused to leave standing around the family she'd refused to let be taken from her. The legal proceedings against Soo-yeon moved with the particular momentum of cases that have excellent documentation, a credible witness, security footage that someone hadn't tried hard enough to delete, and a victim who had recovered enough to give testimony. Woo Bin gave his deposition 6 weeks after coming home. He came back from it quieter than usual, and Nora made dinner and didn't ask questions, and after Moon was in bed, he sat at the kitchen counter and said, "She cried." Nora didn't say anything. "She cried in the hallway when she saw me," he said. "Real tears. I could tell they were real." He was quiet. "She loves me, in her way, and she still did all of it." "Yes," Nora said. "How do you hold that?" he said. And she recognized the question. He'd asked a version of it before, in the hospital, and she'd given him the best answer she had. But this was a different version of it. Not how do you hold it in theory, how do you actually, practically daily hold it? "You don't hold it alone," she said. "That's the only answer I have. You don't hold it alone and you don't hold it constantly. You put it down sometimes. You let yourself have days when it's not the thing you're carrying, and then you pick it back up when you need to and you carry it with the people who love you." She met his eyes. "And you remember that her choices are not your fault, not mine, not Moon's, just hers." Woo Bin was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I owe you something." "You don't owe me anything," Nora said immediately. "Not a debt," he said. "That's not what I mean." He turned on the stool to face her fully. "I mean, I know what my family put you through before any of this, for years. I know what they said to you and about you and what they tried to take from you. I knew it while it was happening. Not all of it, not every instance, but enough. And I fought some of it, but not enough. Not nearly enough." His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. "I told myself I was protecting the peace. I told myself it would get better. I told myself you were strong enough to handle it." He shook his head. "You were. But that's not the point. The point is I should have been in front of you, not beside you, and I wasn't." Nora looked at her husband. This man who had come back to her from somewhere very far away, who was still finding his way back in pieces, who was sitting in their kitchen on a Tuesday night holding himself accountable for things that had happened before anyone tried to kill him, before the amnesia, before any of it. "I know," she said. "I was angry about it. For a long time." "I know you were," he said. "You hid it well." "I hide things well when I'm playing a long game," she said. He almost smiled. "Are you still angry?" She considered this honestly, the way she considered everything. "No," she said. I think I was angry because I needed you to see it. And now you see it. That's what I needed. Not an apology. Just to be seen correctly." Woo Bin reached across the counter and took her hand. The same gesture as the hospital room, the same certainty of placement, the same quality of a man who knew exactly where his hand belonged. "I see you correctly," he said. "I always did, even when I didn't act like it. You are the most—" He stopped and started again, and she could see him choosing the words with care, the way he always chose words with care. "You are the most remarkable person I know, Nora. Not because you survived, not because you fought, but because you did all of it without becoming hard. You stayed, you." Nora was quiet for a moment. "Your son helped," she said finally. "Our son," Woo Bin said. "Our son," she agreed. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning in January, Nora was in the kitchen making coffee when she heard voices from the living room. Woo Bin's low and unhurried, Moon's higher and rapid-fire, conducting what was apparently a very serious debate about something involving racing. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at them. Father and son on the left side of the couch, Woo Bin's side, the side Moon had kept aggressively warm in his absence, Moon gesturing with both hands while making his case for something. Woo Bin listening with the focused attention he gave everything Moon said, which was one of the things about him that had made Nora love him before she'd even realized she was falling. Moon looked up and caught her watching. "Iyama," he said, "tell Appa that if I win my school race, I should get a trophy even if it's just a certificate, because certificates are just paper trophies." "Certificates are absolutely paper trophies," Nora said. Moon pointed at his father with vindicated energy. Woo Bin looked at Nora with the expression of a man who understood he'd just been outvoted and had made his peace with it. "You two are a coalition," he said. "We've had years of practice," Moon said cheerfully. Nora brought her coffee into the living room and sat down, on Woo Bin's other side, the three of them filling the couch the way they always had, the way that had always been the shape of this family even when one of its members had been somewhere else trying to find his way back to it. Woo Bin put his arm around her. Moon continued his case for paper trophies. Outside, Seoul went about its January business, cold and bright and indifferent to the particular miracle happening on the left side of one family's couch. Now here's what Nora would tell you, if you asked her, about surviving the thing that tried to break her. She would tell you it wasn't strength. Not exactly. Strength implies you have a choice about whether to hold the weight, and she never felt like she had a choice. The weight was there, and Moon was watching, and the house was hers, and Woo Bin was somewhere on the other side of his own mind trying to find the door back, and so she held it. Not because she was exceptional, because it was hers to hold. She would tell you the loneliest part wasn't the exclusion or the humiliation or the years of being treated like an inconvenience wearing a woman's face. The loneliest part was the moments when she almost believed them. When Soo-yeon's voice was so consistent and so certain and so backed by the full weight of family and culture and history that Nora's own voice went quiet. Those moments, those were the ones that cost something real. She would tell you Moon saved her as many times as she saved him. That a 6-year-old sliding off a kitchen stool to take his mother's hand can be the difference between someone who keeps going and someone who doesn't. That children see clearly because they haven't learned yet to look away from what's true. That his version of her, steady, unconfused, the least confused person he knew, was the version she reached for on the days when her own version went dark. And she would tell you, this part quietly, this part only if you asked directly, that the thing she's proudest of is not winning. It's that she never became what they tried to make her. She never became bitter the way they wanted her to, never became small, never became the version of herself that would have proved their point. She stayed Nora. That was the victory that mattered. The rest was just paperwork. Moon fell asleep between them on the couch that Saturday, which he would deny if anyone asked, and which both his parents pretended not to notice because some things are more important than a 6-year-old's dignity. Woobin looked at Nora over their sleeping son. "Hey," he said quietly. "Hey," she said. "Thank you," he said, "for not leaving, for fighting, for keeping—" He looked at Moon, at the house, at all of it. "For keeping this." Nora looked at her husband, at the man who had found his way back from somewhere very far away, at the family that had been tested by something designed to destroy it and had come through, not undamaged. Damage was honest and they would carry it, but intact. Fundamentally, stubbornly, gloriously intact. This was always worth keeping, she said. Outside, Seoul was cold and bright. Inside, the left side of the couch held everything that mattered. And if you've ever fought for something that was yours, if you've ever stood in a hallway in yesterday's clothes holding a juice box and decided that no, not today, today I do not leave, then you already know how this feels. You already know that the most powerful thing in any room is a person who has decided they are not going anywhere. Drop a comment below and tell me, what was the moment in this story that hit you the hardest? The moment you knew Nora wasn't going to break? I read every single one. And if you know someone who's fighting right now, fighting for their family, their marriage, their right to be in a room where someone keeps trying to erase them, share this with them today. Not because they need to be told it gets better, but because sometimes you just need to know that someone else held on too. This has been your story. Until next time, stay rooted. Stay you. Nobody gets to write your ending but you.